Hello everyone, this is Dr. Vishal Trivedi from Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Guwahati. And what we were discussing about the different properties of the living organisms, and in that context, in the current discussion, we are discussing about the human physiology. So, in the previous module, we have discussed about the digestive system. So, the purpose of the digestive system is that it is actually going to provide the nutrition into the system, right. So, it is actually going to generate that nutrients which are going to be provided after the digestion is going to be utilized into the different types of metabolic reactions, and that is how they are actually going to provide the energy into the system. Once you have the energy from these nutrients, then this energy can be utilized for performing the other physiological processes such as circulatory system, muscular system, nervous system, endocrine system, and the excretory systems. So, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss about the muscular systems. But before we getting into the detail of the muscular system, let's discuss about the requirement and the possible mechanisms through which the different animals are doing the locomotions. So, the first question is that what is locomotion? So, the locomotion is a very well defined process by which the locomotion is being defined as an ability of an organism to move from the one place to another place, which means the locomotion is a submission of the activities which are responsible for the organisms to move from the one place to another place. The organs which are actually going to help in the locomotion is called as the locomotive organs. Okay, and if you recall in our module number 1, we have said that the organisms are going to be classified into the different kingdoms, or different types of organisms are being found. So, you can have the bacteria, you can have the fungi, you can have the archaebacteria, and you can have the plants, or you can have the animals. All these different different kingdoms of the organisms are actually utilizing the different types of locomotive organs for the locomotions. For example, you might have seen that the ants, right, they are actually using the legs for their locomotions. Similarly, you might have seen the centipede or the millipedes, right. So, they have the hundreds of tiny legs, and then they use these tiny legs to crawl from the one place to another place. Apart from that, the birds are, even if you go to the higher animals or if you go to the plants, you will see that the plants are also having the different types of movement from one place to another place. So, some plants are free moving plants, right. So, they can actually move from one place to another plant. Apart from that, you might have seen the higher animals. So, higher animals are actually having the limbs, and they actually utilize the limbs, right. In some of the plants or in some of the higher animals, the limbs are also being converted into the feathers, and these are called birds. So, you might have seen the different types of birds which actually utilizes the feathers to fly into the air, and they also have the two pairs of limbs, so that actually they can also do walk onto the surface also. You might have seen the ducks, right. So, you might have seen they have the feathers, right, and they also use the completely modified limbs, and that is how they actually walk onto the surface also. So, these are the few of the examples how the different organisms are utilizing the different types of locomotive organs for the locomotions, right. I have given you example of like the limbs, flagella, and cilia. So, flagella are and the cilia are the locomotive organs into the bacteria or the paramecium, right. So, you might have seen the paramecium which has the cilia all over the body, and then they utilize that cilia to move from one place to another place. Similarly, the bacteria are actually having the flagellated bacteria or other kinds of bacteria which also they use to move from one place to another place. So, what is the purpose of the locomotion? So, locomotion is actually being required, or the most movement from one place to another place is required for many purposes. For example, locomotion is allowed to take you the nutrition, right. So, sometimes the locomotion is actually being directed by the nutritions, right. So, then it is actually called as the chemotactic movement. Sometimes the locomotion is required because you want to avoid a particular prey, right. So, that time you are actually going to run away, right. So, that locomotion is going to help the organism to avoid the prey, and it is actually going to get saved from the particular prey, right. The locomotion is also required for hunting. So, you might have seen the many of these lion or other kinds of big animals that they are actually running very fast, and that is how they are actually capturing their host, right. So, that is how they are actually catching the different types of animals, and that is how they are using them for taking up the nutritions. Locomotion is also being used for migration of the organisms from the one location to another location. So, locomotion is also required for the migration. So, that is how you are actually going that help in the organism for the better adaptations. You might have heard about the different types of migratory birds, like which actually runs all over the place from Siberia to, and then they come to the Asian countries in the different locations. So, that they do because they have to adopt for a very low temperature. So, when there is a low temperature in Siberia, they actually go migrates to the less colder places. So, locomotion is a very important activity because it allows the organism to explore the many things, and locomotion in the higher animal is a combination where you have a you require a well defined machinery, so that you can be able to perform you can be able to move from one place to another place. So, the machinery what is required for movement in the higher animals like the humans is called as the muscular system. But the muscular system is not working in alone, right. Muscular system, in addition to the skeletal system, is actually a part of the locomotion in the case of humans. So, what you see here is that this is the humerus, right, and then humerus is actually being connected to the different types of muscles, and these muscles are actually allowing the movement of the hands. Okay, so if you want to move your hand, you are actually going to use these muscles. So, this bone is actually going to provide the framework, but the movement is also always going to be generated by the muscular system. So, the muscular system is actually going to generate the driving force, and the skeletal system is actually going to provide the strength into the system. So, that is why you can actually be able to carry the bucket of water, or that is how you can actually be able to walk, because if you remove the skeletal system, right, the same kind of machinery is actually allowing the worms or other kinds of lower animals to crawl from the one place to another place. So, they have a thick muscles, and these thick muscles are allowing them to crawl. But since we have the skeletal system, we can be able to stand up, and we can be able to walk. So, muscle is one type of tissue among the 4 different tissues. Muscle is a specialized type of tissue, and it is originating from the mesoderm. So, you know that when we were talking about the different types of developmental layers, the muscles are actually going to be produced from the mesoderm. Muscle alone contribute around 40 to 50% of the body weight of the human. So, this flesh what you are actually going to see in a human body is nothing but the muscles. Like you have the muscles in your hand, you have the muscles in your limb, you have the muscles in your ribs and all other places. So, wherever you are actually requiring a movement, whether a movement of the ribs so that you can be able to breathe, or whether it is the movement of the hand or leg so that you can be able to perform the different types of tasks. It's all being done by the muscular system, and that's why the muscular system contributes 40 to 50% of the body weight of the humans. What are the things they will actually going to do is, muscles are actually going to do the excitability, they will do the contractibility, elasticity, and the extensibility are the special characteristic nature of the muscle cell, which means the muscles can actually get excited when they are actually going to get the signal from the brain. They also can contract, so they can actually go into the contraction, right? So they can actually pull, right? They can be elastic also, so they can be get relaxed, right? So they can be very relaxed conditions, and then they can also be able to stretch. So they are also very flexible in terms of stretching, right? So these are the very feature of the muscle cells. And based on the location, the muscles are classified into the three different categories. You have the skeletal muscles. So as the name suggests, the skeletal muscles are always going to be associated with the skeleton. Then we have the visceral muscles. So these visceral muscles are actually going to be present, all the muscles which are going to be present into the internal organ. Uh, and then you have the cardiac muscles which are the muscles which are actually going to make the heart. All these three different types of muscles have their own structures, their own morphology, and their own composition, and that's why they have the different functions to contribute into the different aspects of the locomotions. Now, let us talk about the skeleton muscles. So, muscles which are associated with the skeleton component are called as the skeleton muscles, right. So, remember that in the previous slide I have shown you the two skeleton muscles, right. These are the skeletal muscles because you have a bone which is called humerus, right. So, this is the hand bone, these are the radial ulna. So, these are the humerus, right, this is the radial ulna what you have, and these are all connected to their different types of muscles, and these muscles are the skeletal muscles, and because they can actually be able to stretch, they can be able to pull, that's why you can be able to move your hand like this, okay. So the skeletal muscles are always been associated with the skeleton of the body, right. The microscopically their appearance is look like the striped, so they are actually having the fibers, right, fiber like appearances. Hence, they are also called as the straight muscles. These muscles activities are regulated voluntarily by the nervous system, which means the skeletal muscles are actually the can be regulated by the voluntarily by the nervous system, which means our brain actually can control their activities. So you can actually be able to uplift your hand, you can do different types of activities with your hand because the brain is sending the signal to these muscles. So these muscles are under the tight control of the nervous system. The principal action of the skeletal muscles is the locomotion, and it can modulate the body shape as well. So skeletal muscles are the major muscles what are going to be present in the human body, and they are actually going to be striped muscles. So they are actually going to have the stripe like the fiber kind of thing, and they are also being regulated voluntarily by the nervous system, which means they can be as per the wish of the person, they can actually be able to move. Then we have the visceral muscles. So, as the name suggests, the visceral muscles are going to be present along with the inner body. So, visceral muscles are present in the inner wall of the hollow visceral organ of the body, like for example, the muscles which are actually going to present in the alimentary canal, or the muscles which are present in the other part of the human internal organs. Examples includes like the muscles which are performing in the alimentary canal, reproductive tracts. Unlike skeleton muscles, they are smooth in appearance, which means they are not fiber like. So, they are not striped, they are unstriped or the smooth muscles. They are involuntarily in nature, so nervous system cannot control voluntarily, which means these muscles are actually going to function without under the control of the nervous system. So, you cannot control your muscles which are regulating the Peristatic movement, for example, in your stomach or the other part of the alimentary canal. So that is involuntarily. As soon as they will actually going to have the food, the muscle, the stomach is actually going to have the peristatic movement. Same is true for the oesophagus also. Oesophagus is also one, as soon as it has the food, it is actually going to have the peristatic movement, so that the food is actually going to move downwards. So that's why that could be the reason that you cannot actually control the vomiting, right? You cannot stop the vomiting simply by giving a instruction from your brain, because they are involuntarily in nature, so they cannot be controlled by the brain. Visceral muscles are involved into the food transport within the digestive tract and the gamete transport within the genital tract. Apart from that, you also have the cardiac muscles. So, heart consists of the cardiac muscles in which the cells assemble in a branching pattern, and like the skeletal muscles, they are also striped. So, they are also striped, and the activity wise they are involuntarily in nature, and this nervous system cannot control the muscular cardiac muscles directly. This means the cardiac muscles are actually a hybrid of the skeletal muscle and the visceral system, except that there are some specialized feature associated with the cardiac muscles. So, the feature which are associated with the visceral muscles are that they are involuntarily in nature, and the feature which are associated with the skeletal muscle is that they are striped in nature. So, they are actually going to function into the heart, so that heart can actually be able to do the contraction and relaxation for a very long time, and then they are involuntary, which means even if you give the message from the brain that okay, stop heart, please don't beat, it's not going to work, right? So it's not under the control of the brain, right? And that's why you know that why it is so important, right? Heart has to beat irrespective of the instruction from the brain, right? So let's discuss the, since we have the three different types of muscles, all these three different types of muscles have the contrasting features, and that we can actually discuss in the tabular format. So as far as the location, so we have a differences between the skeletal, visceral and cardiac muscles, right? So as far the location is concerned, the skeletal muscles are present all over the body, right? So they are present around the body and they are present in the throughout the body, whereas the visceral muscles are present in the inner wall of the alimentary canal and the reproductive tract, and their main function is to contribute into the movement of the food or the movement of the gametes, whereas the cardiac muscles are present in the heart. Morphological appearances, the skeletal muscles are striped, visceral muscles are smooth, whereas the cardiac muscles are striped with the cross linking. So, you see that cardiac muscles are actually having the hybrid properties of the skeletal muscles as well as the visceral muscles. Then the nervous controls, so the skeletal muscles are voluntarily, which means they are under the control of the brain, whereas the visceral muscles or the cardiac muscles are involuntarily, which means the brain cannot control their activities. Then the functions. The function of the skeletal muscle is that it is actually going to help in the movement, whether it is actually going to allow the movement of the individual hands or legs, or is actually going to help in the terms of locomotions. Whereas the visceral muscles are always been going to function in the in the form of the transport. So it's actually going to transport the food, or it actually going to transport the gametes like the sperms or the ovum. The cardiac muscles are helping only the pump. So they are actually going to be present in the heart, and then they are actually going to help in the contraction as well as the relaxation of the heart. Then the contraction type. So contraction type is going to be short twitch and long tetanic. So these are the cardiac contraction type what is going to be present in the skeletal muscles. Then in the case of visceral muscles, it's going to be concentric, ecocentric and the isometric as well as the isotonic contractions. and then in the cardiac muscles you are going to have the long tetanic conditions, contractions. Don't worry about these contraction types, or if you could not be able to follow right now, because we are going to discuss about the different types of contractions, what is present in the muscular system, or what are the actually going to be generated by the different types of muscles in our subsequent lecture. So elasticity is that the skeletal muscles are elastic in nature. They all are elastic in nature, so they can actually be able to relax and contract and all those kind of things. As far as the size is concerned, the skeletal muscles are 10 to 80 micrometer, voluntary muscles, visceral muscles are 1 to 5 micrometer, and the cardiac muscles are more than 10 micrometer. So, let us start discussing about the structure as well as the function of the individual muscles, so that it will actually help you to understand how these muscles are contributing into the different types of activities, whether it is related to movement, whether it is related to transport, or whether it is related to pumping the blood within the body. So, let us start with the structure of the skeletal muscle. So, this is what you see here is the skeletal muscle, where you have the fiber like structure. So, all these fibers are arranged and they are actually going to have the different types of coverings. So, the muscle cells are also called as the muscle fiber. They are long, cylindrical and the multinucleated cells. So, these the individual muscles what you see here is going to be come together, and that is how they are actually going to form a very long cylindrical and multinucleated cells. The muscle fibers were organized in the three levels. Okay, they are epimysium, endomysium and the perimysium. So, they are actually going to have the three different level of organizations. You can have the endomysium, you can have the perimysium, and then you can also have the epimysium. See, muscles are covered by the thick and the tough connective tissue, which is called as the epimysium. So, what you see here is actually the outer thick covering, that is called as the epimysium. The epimysium separates one muscle from the another muscle. So, epimysium is actually going to allow making a bunch of the muscle, but it actually separates the one muscle from the another muscles. The collagen fibers of the epimysiums are wavy in appearances, and it has the connection with the perimysium. So, epimysium is going to have the collagen fibers, and they are actually going to have the wavy appearances, and they are connected with the perimysium. Each perimysium covers 100 to 150 muscle fibers and form the fascicules. So, perimysium is going to have the individual fascicules, and these fascicules are going to become together into the perimysiums. Interstitial space between the muscle fiber is around 1 micrometer, which allows the development of the tunnel in the perimysium. Thus, the arteries, veins and nerves can pass through. So, between these individual fascicules, you have the spaces, and these spaces are actually going to be used by running the arteries, veins and all other kinds of material, so that they can be able to get these muscle cell actually can actually be able to get the nutrition, oxygen and all other kind of things. In perimysium, the collagen fibers are arranged as wavy form with cross-link, which helps to improve the strength and the stability of the muscle fibers. Then we have the endomysium. So, endomysium is consist of the loose connective tissue, and they additionally add up the strength of the muscle fibers. Endomysium are also connected with the perimysium for the strength. Okay. Now, apart from this, you also going to have the so all the individual muscle fibers are lined by the plasma membrane, which is called as the sarcolemma, which is enclosing the sarcoplasm. Okay. Muscle fiber contains the multiple nuclei or the syncytium, and the sarcoplasma contain relatively high amount of the glycogen granules, myoglobin. Okay. So, glycogen granules, that is actually going to provide the nutrition, and the myoglobin, which is actually going to provide the oxygen. Moreover, the high amount of calcium stored into the endoplasmic reticulum. So, muscle cells are actually going to have the very high concentration of the calcium in their endoplasmic reticulum. Parallel arrangement of the myofilament in the sarcoplasm is one of the characteristic nature of the muscle fibers. There are two types of myofilament known as the myofibril present in the muscle fibers. Based on the thickness, the myofibril termed as the thin as well as the thick myofilament, which is made up of the actin and the myosin filaments. Okay, so what you see here is the actin as well as the myosin. The actin filament, otherwise termed as the I band or the isoelectric band, whereas the myosin filament are termed as the A band or the anisotropic bands. Actin and the myosin filaments are arranged alternatively and run across the muscle fiber longitudinally into the Z line and the M line, which are fiber with the elastic in nature present in between I band and the A band respectively. So, what you see here is the actin filament, and you are also going to have the myosin filament, which goes into the alternatively. The portion in between to A band is termed as the sarcomere, which is a functional unit of the muscles which is responsible for the contractions. So, in the individual skeleton muscles are actually going to have the different types of proteins which are actually going to contribute in terms of the formation of the fibers or the other kinds of activities. So, let us see what are the different proteins which are responsible for the formation of the fibers. So, the first protein what you have is the actin protein. So, actin is one of the major muscle protein which is polymeric in nature. So, the G actin is the monomeric unit of the actin filament and it is globular in nature. Its molecular weight is approximately 43 kilodalton. The number of actin monomer units polymerize and form the multimeric fiber which is called as the F actin. So, F actin is called as the polymeric fibers or fibrous actin. The two F actin coiled around each other to form the alpha helices. So, this is what you see here is the one actin monomer, the another actin monomer, and that is how they are actually forming a coiled structure. So, they are actually forming the helices. Thickness of the F actin filament is approximately 6 to 7 nanometer and it consists of the 14 G actin monomer or the molecule per ton. Association with the tropomyosin and troponin, F actin forms the I band of the myofibrils. Troponin masks the active binding site for the myosin on the actin filament. So, apart from this you also have the tropomyosin and troponin, and that is actually going to help in terms of the muscle contractions. Then we have the another protein which is called as the myosin. So, myosin is another major muscle. So, myosin is actually going to provide the driving, right. So, myosin is called as the motor proteins. So, they are actually going to provide the strength into the muscles, and the actin is actually going to provide the strength. So, it is a hexameric protein. It consists of the 2 heavy chain and the 4 light chains. Molecular weight of the heavy chain and the light chains are approximately 200 kilodalton and 15 to 27 kilodalton respectively. Heavy chain forms the dimeric filament by coiling alpha helically each other except the N terminus. So, this is what you see here is that the myosin filaments, right. So, you have the myosin filament where you have the globular domain and then you have the H chain. So, this is the heavy chain what you have, and these are the light chains what you have. The unbound N terminus of the myosin is globular in nature and it serves as the binding site for the another light chain as well as the F actin. So, these are actually the globular domain which are actually going to bind the actin fibers, and they are also going to bind the light chains. The N terminus of the myosin has the ATPase activity. So, this is the portion which actually going to have the ATPase activity, whereas the carboxy terminal of the myofilament meet together at the H zone, whereas the N terminus meet together at the margin of the A band. Apart from that, you also have the tropomyosin and the troponin. So, tropomyosin is a rod-like fibrous protein molecule. Its molecular weight is approximately 66 kilodalton. It made up of the two different alpha and beta peptide, and for both are alpha helical in nature. The double-stranded tropomyosin runs parallel with the thin fiber in the grooves of the F-active strands. Then we have the troponin. Troponin is a globular protein and it exists as three interconnected protein system. They are TPT like tropomyosin binding protein, TPC which is calcium binding protein, and the TPI which is the actin and the TPC binding proteins. Troponin lies on the thin filament with an interval of the 38.5 nanometer, but the rest attached with the F-actin and the tropomyosin. Polymerization of the desmin results intermediate filament which is predominantly present in the Z line, and a alpha actinin is a homodimeric protein and often anchors the end of the F-actin to the Z line. So, these are the proteins which are actually going to contribute into the formation of the fibers, and that is how these fibers are actually going to perform the muscle contractions. But as I said, the skeletal muscles are voluntary muscles. So, skeletal muscles should actually get the signal from the brain, and that is why the skeletal muscles are also going to have the well developed the neuromuscular junctions. Neuromuscular junction is a place where actually the neurons are actually going to communicate with the muscles, and that is how they are actually going to give the signal to the muscles whether they are supposed to contract or whether they are supposed to relax. So, they are actually going to give the signal using the neuromuscular junctions. So, the neuromuscular junction in the skeletal muscles is look like something like this, okay, where you have the muscle cells and these are the axons, okay. So, axon is a part of the neurons, okay. This is anyway we are going to discuss when we are going to discuss about the nervous systems. So, the neuromuscular junction is a connective region of the efferent nerve fiber of the nerve system and the muscle fiber of the muscular system through the synapses. So, this the region where they both are going to crosstalk to each other. That is how they are actually going to provide the neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are going to give the signal to the muscles are called as the synapses. These are the places where you are actually going to have the communications. The entire junction is covered by a cell which is called as the Schwann cells for the insulation purposes, right. So, the Schwann cells are going to be present here, and these Schwann cells are actually going to make the whole synapse as the insulated. And invaginating membrane appears present in this junction is called as the synaptic gutter, where the axonal neuron ends, the subneural cleft around the axon terminal, and it increases the surface area for the synaptic terminus. So, this is what you see here is the terminal portion of the axon, and that is going to communicate with the lowering the muscle cells, and that is how they are actually going to communicate. In many of these cases or many of the neural diseases, this communication is going to be broken, right, and in that case it is actually not, even the muscle cells are completely healthy, they will not going to get any kind of contraction, and that is the portion, that is the disease which when it is called as the paralysis, right. In the paralysis, the brain is not being able to communicate with the muscle cell, and that is why you cannot move your hand or legs or something like that, right. Now let's move on to the next muscle type. So the next muscle type is called as the visceral type. Okay, so these are the visceral muscles. So the structure of the visceral muscles. So visceral muscles or the smooth muscles are fusiform in shape, right? So these are the visceral muscles and they are smooth in shape, right? So these are the relaxed smooth muscles there, whereas this is the contracted smooth muscles. They mostly present free in nature, that is the single fiber form, and it has the greater elasticity than the muscle fiber. Contractibility and the extendibility are also higher than the muscle fibers. The myosin, actin, troponin, tropomyosin, calpolin, calcedrin are some of the protein which are present in the smooth muscle cells. So what you see here is they are actually going to have the dense bodies and in a relaxed mode, right? And then they're also going to have the intermediate filaments. So intermediate filaments are going to be formed by the some of these muscles proteins, and they are actually going to be smooth muscles. Once they contract, these are the contracted muscles. Okay, so the structure of the contracted muscles. Neuromuscular junctions, so although they are not being voluntarily being controlled, but they still require the signal from the neural nervous systems. So the branches of the autonomous nervous fibers intervene the smooth muscles in a diffuse manner. The junctions are not connected directly with the muscles, but they secrete the neurotransmitter at the external space of the muscle fiber. The secreted neurotransmitter diffuse through the muscle fiber membrane to transmit the signal. So neuromuscular junction in the smooth muscles are actually not going to be voluntarily being controlled. So they are not going to be voluntarily being controlled, but there are, and they are not directly connected to the smooth muscle cells also. What they will do is the neural cells are actually going to secrete the neurotransmitters, and that's how they are actually going to give the signal to the smooth muscles to go for the contraction or the relaxations. Now let's move to the next part. So the next part is the structure of the cardiac muscles. So the cardiac muscles are having feature like the skeletal muscles. So they are actually going to have the hybrid features, right? So as far as the functionality is concerned, they are actually going to follow the features of the skeletal muscles, but as far as the control is concerned, they are actually going to have the features of the smooth muscles. Cardiac muscles are separated by a dark area which is called as the intercalated disc, right? So cardiac muscles are going to be separated from each other. So this is a one cardiac fibers, and this is another cardiac fiber, and this is going to be separated from a intercalated disc. They are striped and the interconnected. So these are the different fibers which are interconnected. Just like skeletal muscles, they are also striped and interconnected. The gap junctions and the desmosomes are also present in the cardiac muscles, and the interconnected cardiac muscle cells are called as syncytium. Okay, so this means they are actually going to have diffuse cells. The heart consists of the two different types of syncytium known as the arterial syncytium as well as the ventricular syncytiums. So you can actually have the two different types of cardiac muscles, or the cardiac muscles will have the two different types of syncytiums. Either it can be arterial syncytium, so that will be present in the arterial region, and you can also have the ventricular syncytium, which is going to be present in the ventricles. So this is just a description about the structure. So you can have the nucleus, you can have the fibers, and these fibers are actually going to be separated from the intercalated disc. And if you see the structures, they are also going to have the desmosomes and the gap junctions and all that. So with this brief discussion about the machinery, what is going to be responsible for the contraction as well as the relaxation in the muscular system. So what we have discussed about the cardiac muscles, we have discussed about the smooth muscles, and then we also discuss about the skeletal muscles. And within the skeletal muscles, we have discussed about the different types of proteins which are responsible for making the muscle fibers. So we such as the actin fibers, the myosin fibers, tropomyosin, and the troponin. And all these proteins are actually going to function in coordination with each other, and that's how you are actually going to perform the muscle contractions. So in our subsequent lecture, we are actually going to discuss about the mechanism of the muscle contractions and how the muscle contraction is happening in the smooth muscles and how the muscle contraction is happening in the skeletal muscles and so on. So with this, I would like to conclude my lecture here. Thank you.